My native land, good night. The 14th of August was the day fixed upon for the sailing of the brig Pilgrim on her voyage from Boston round Cape Horn to the western coast of North America. As she was to get under way early in the afternoon, I made my appearance on board at 12 o'clock in full sea rig and with my chest containing an outfit for a 2 or 3 years' voyage, which I had undertaken from a determination to cure, if possible, by an entire change of life, and by a long absence from books and study, a weakness of the eyes which had obliged me to give up my pursuits, and which no medical aid seemed likely to cure. I joined the crew, and we hauled out into the stream, and came to anchor for the night. The next day we were employed in preparations for sea, reeving studding sail gear, crossing royal yards, putting on chafing gear, and taking on board our powder. On the following night I stood my first watch. I remained awake nearly all the first part of the night, and when I went on deck, so great were my ideas of the importance of my trust, that I walked regularly fore and aft the whole length of the vessel, looking out over the bows and taffrail at each turn. I was not a little surprised at the coolness of the old salt, whom I called to take my place, in stowing himself snugly away under the longboat for a nap. The next morning was Saturday, and, a breeze having sprung up from the southward, we took a pilot on board, and began beating down the bay. As we drew down into the lower harbor, we found the wind ahead in the bay, and were obliged to come to anchor in the roads. We remained there through the day and a part of the night. My watch began at 11 o'clock at night. About midnight the wind became fair, and having called the captain, I was ordered to call all hands. How I accomplished this I do not know, but I am quite sure that I did not give the true hoarse boatswain call of all hands up anchor, ahoy! In a short time everyone was in motion. The sails loosed, the yards braced, and we began to heave up the anchor. I could take but little part in these preparations. My little knowledge of a vessel was all at fault. Unintelligible orders were so rapidly given and so immediately executed, there was such a hurrying about, and such an intermingling of strange cries and stranger actions, that I was completely bewildered. At length, those peculiar long-drawn sounds which denote that the crew are heaving at the windlass began, and in a few minutes we were under way. The noise of the water thrown from the bows began to be heard. The vessel leaned over from the damp night breeze, and rolled with the heavy groundswell, and we had actually begun our long, long journey. The first day we passed at sea was the Sabbath. As we were just from the port, and there was a great deal to be done on board, we were kept at work all day, and at night the watches were set, and everything put into sea order. I, being in the starboard or second mate's watch, had the opportunity of keeping the first watch at sea. S, a young man making, like myself, his first voyage, was in the same watch, and as he was the son of a professional man, we found that we had many friends and topics in common. We talked matters over, Boston, what our friends were probably doing, our voyage, etc., until he went to take his turn at the lookout, and left me to myself. I had now a fine time for reflection, but all my dreams were soon put to flight by an order from the officer to trim the yards, as the wind was getting ahead, and I could plainly see, by the looks the sailors occasionally cast to windward, and by the dark clouds that were fast coming up, that we had bad weather to prepare for, and had heard the captain say that he expected to be in the Gulf Stream by 12 o'clock. In a few minutes 8 bells were struck, the watch called, and we went below. I now began to feel the first discomforts of a sailor's life. The steerage in which I lived was filled with coils of rigging, spare sails, old junk, and ship stores which had not been stowed away. Moreover, there had been no berths built for us to sleep in. The sea, too, had risen, the vessel was rolling heavily, and everything was pitched about in grand confusion. There was a complete hurrah's nest, as the sailors say, everything on top and nothing at hand. A large hawser had been coiled away upon my chest. My hats, boots, mattress, and blankets had all fetched away and gone over to leeward, and were jammed and broken under the boxes and coils of rigging. To crown all, I was just beginning to feel strong symptoms of seasickness, and that listlessness and inactivity which accompany it. Giving up all attempts to collect my things together, I lay down upon the sails, expecting every moment to hear the cry of all hands ahoy, which the approaching storm would soon make necessary. I shortly heard the raindrops falling on deck thick and fast, and the watch evidently had their hands full of work, for I could hear the loud and repeated orders of the mate, the trampling of feet, the creaking of blocks, and all the accompaniments of a coming storm. In a few minutes, the slide of the hatch was thrown back, which let down the noise and tumult of the deck still louder. The loud cry of "All hands ahoy! Tumble up here and take in sail!" saluted our ears, and the hatch was quickly shut again. When I got upon deck, a new scene and a new experience was before me. The little brig was close hauled upon the wind, and lying over, as it then seemed to me, nearly upon her beam ends. The heavy head sea was beating against her bows with the noise and force almost of a sledgehammer, and flying over the deck, drenching us completely through. The topsail halyards had been let go, and the great sails were filling out and backing against the masts with a noise like thunder. The wind was whistling through the rigging, loose ropes flying about, loud, and to me, unintelligible orders constantly given and rapidly executed, and the sailors singing out at the ropes in their hoarse and peculiar strains. In addition to all this, I had not got my sea legs on, was dreadfully sick, with hardly strength enough to hold on to anything, and it was pitch dark. This was my state when I was ordered aloft, for the first time, to reef topsails. How I got along, I cannot now remember. I laid out on the yards and held on with all my strength. I could not have been of much service, for I remember having been sick several times before I left the topsail yard. Soon all was snug aloft, and we were again allowed to go below. This state of things continued for 2 days. Wednesday, August 20th. When we came on deck at 4 o'clock, we found things much changed for the better. The sea and wind had gone down, and the stars were out bright. Nothing will compare with the early breaking of day upon the wide, sad ocean. There was something in the first gray streaks stretching along the eastern horizon and throwing an indistinct light upon the face of the deep, which creates a feeling of loneliness, of dread, and of melancholy foreboding, which nothing else in nature can give. From such reflections as these, I was aroused by the order from the officer, "Forward there! Rig the head pump." I found that no time was allowed for daydreaming, but that we must turn to at the first light. Having called up the idlers, namely carpenter, cook, steward, etc., and rigged the pump, we commenced washing down the decks. This operation, which is performed every morning at sea, takes nearly 2 hours, and I had hardly strength enough to get through it. After we had finished, swabbed down, and coiled up the rigging, I sat on the spars, waiting for 7 bells, which was the sign for breakfast. The officer, seeing my lazy posture, ordered me to slush the mainmast from the royal masthead down. The vessel was then rolling a little, and I had taken no sustenance for 3 days, so that I felt tempted to tell him that I had rather wait till after breakfast. But I knew that if I showed any sign of want of spirit or of backwardness, I should be ruined at once. So I took my bucket of grease and climbed up to the royal masthead. Here the rocking of the vessel, which increases the higher you go from the foot of the mast, which is the fulcrum of the lever, and the smell of the grease upset my stomach again, and I was not a little rejoiced when I got upon the comparative terra firma of the deck. In a few minutes, 7 bells were struck, the log hove, the watch called, and we went to breakfast. I cannot describe the change which half a pound of cold salt beef and a biscuit or two produced in me. I was a new being. We had a watch below until noon, so that I had some time to myself, and getting a huge piece of strong cold salt beef from the cook, I kept gnawing upon it until 12 o'clock. When we went on deck, I felt somewhat like a man, and could begin to learn my sea duty with considerable spirit. At about 2 o'clock we heard the loud cry of "Sail ho!" from aloft, and soon saw 2 sails to windward, going directly athwart our hawse. This was the first time that I had seen a sail at sea. I thought then, and have always since, that it exceeds every other sight in interest and beauty. They passed to leeward of us, and out of hailing distance. Thursday, August 21st. This day the sun rose clear, we had a fine wind, and everything was bright and cheerful. About 6 bells, that is 3 o'clock p.m., we saw a sail on our larboard bow. I was very anxious, like every new sailor, to speak her. She came down to us, backed her main topsail, and the 2 vessels stood head-on, bowing and curveting at each other like a couple of war horses reined in by their riders. It was the first vessel that I had seen near, and I was surprised to find how much she rolled and plunged in so quiet a sea. She plunged her head into the sea, and then, her stern settling gradually down, her huge bows rose up, showing the bright copper, and her stern and breast hooks dripping with the brine. Her decks were filled with passengers, who had come up at the cry of "Sail ho!" and who, by their dress and features, appeared to be Swiss and French emigrants. She was the ship La Carolina from Havre for New York.